Hey guys, thanks for coming. We're going to be talking about basically unlocking the monolithic user experience but in a modular setting. I'm Dougie. I'm the moderator for this panel. One of the partners of Figment Capital. And we have enough mics for you passing. All right, we're passing. Just to kick this off, could everyone just let's go down the line. Everyone introduce yourselves, what you do. Actually, let's do it this way. And then also your favorite feature of a monolithic experience and from a user experience standpoint.
Hey everyone, my name is Bo. I'm a technical co-founder at Polymer Labs, where we're working on bringing IBC connectivity to L2s as an L2. Is that a favorite part of the monolithic experience?
Yeah, I can use
Flash loans. Okay, next.
Hello everyone, I'm Pratham from Movement Labs, and I've been in the modular ecosystem for about 2 to 3 years, and I work as DevRel for Movement. Really glad to be here and share some things that we're doing to improve UX on blockchains. And I guess one thing that I really like about integrated blockchains is how fast and efficient they are, and how you pick and choose the best parts and integrate that to make the best possible blockchain that you want. So. Yeah, good to be glad to be here.
I'm Matt, co-founder and CEO of Caldera. We are a rollups as a service company, so we're responsible for quite a few of the new rollups that are being launched on Ethereum over the past year or so. And yeah, my favorite part of monolithic chains, I would say, is atomic composability.
So I'm Simon, CTO at Essential. We're building what we're calling the first declarative blockchain. Favorite thing about monolithic chains?
Using one, doesn't have to be
using one. I mean, I guess simplicity in the sense that for a monolithic experience, you don't have to think particularly hard about what you're doing. Yes.
Hi, my name is Amrit, and we are building Modular, which is also a RAS service, so it makes it easier for people to deploy rollups. We also are building this new thing called restake rollups, where the idea is to bring restaking to rollups to offer different decentralization services such as resource sequencing, fast parity, and so on. I guess one cool thing or bad thing, I suppose, of modularity is that we have made things way more complex than it was initially there, and we have added latency at every single stack that we have. So I guess it's a feature, but also a bug in many ways.
Awesome. So the reason why I asked that question was because my first question, this is for really anyone to answer, is do we think we want to just try to resemble the monolithic user experience in a modular setting, or do we think that there's actually another step we can take? Because I don't think anyone who uses Solana or any other monolithic chain is oh, this is Web 2 quality user experience. I guess answering my own question here, but where do we see kind of the modular stack evolving from a UX standpoint? Is it going to be just monolithic, you feel like you're on one chain abstraction thesis, or is there actually another step that we're going to take that makes the whole user experience of blockchain just better than it is today anywhere, whether it's modular or monolithic? I'll get more specific after this.
I mean, I think ideally usability should be completely orthogonal to whether you're using monolithic or monolithic architecture. In an ideal world, good usability and good user experience means you don't know or care if what you're using is modular or is monolithic. Those things are that's part of the idea is those things are abstracted away. As soon as the user is thinking about things that are even that low level, you've lost. You really should be providing an experience where the average user doesn't know or care about these things.
I mean, I think since the very beginning, I don't know, we are not user friendly at all. Right? Look at the Web 2 world where people are having a hard time dealing with passwords, right? And they're very simple, right? Everyone uses the same password everywhere, maybe with slight variations and all. And then we say, you know what, passwords are okay, let's make it even more complicated, let's make you use private keys and public keys, right? So I think, I don't know, from the design perspective, we have never thought about users from the very beginning. It was always about, we are going to build things that developers will use, and somehow users will use it as well. And I think it goes beyond chain abstraction, it goes even deeper. It's what does a user actually do? We're forcing them to not use passwords anymore, but use private keys and public keys. And imagine forcing people, it's kind of similar to saying forcing people to use SSH. every single time you log in to the system. And that's a nightmare, right? And so now we are in a state where we have 10,000s of rollups, and before even rollups, right? If you just go to Aave, you have 10,000 M1s out there, and you have to pick and choose any of them. So I think one thing that we have to change first of all is fundamental way in which we build things, right? We have to stop thinking about, yes, initially people or developers end up building things for themselves, that's good. But at some point we have to change that mentality and say, no, we are going to build products that are going to be used by average people, and we have to make things much more simpler, which I don't think we're doing.
Yeah, so I think like there was a really good point being made about like we have to be more user-centric, and that's especially something that I've noticed in the modular ecosystem is that we're seeing all these alt VM chains coming up. So now we're using the Move VM on Ethereum as a rollup. We're using the SVM, the Solana virtual machine, as a rollup on Ethereum. But there's still not enough wallet support for like these VMs. Like on Ethereum, you have something called chain IDs. Like each chain has their own ID. That doesn't exist on Solana because Solana was meant to be this monolith. So when you just turn a monolithic architecture and take pieces of it and try to build like a modular system, you run into these pains. So I think there's like a lack of standardization that has to be done here. So like that's one aspect from the application level. And there's also like infrastructure level like changes that we have to make. For example, like chain IDs, which is important because if you have multiple SVM rollups, you can just replicate the block hash and get the user to sign something on a different chain that they did not intend to. So we have to take, like, there needs to be more standardization of the UX as well. So that's something I've noticed.
I'm glad you brought up that point because that was literally my next question. And like, Bo, to start with you, I'm very curious because like I think an issue with, at least for Ethereum today, is like there isn't standardization really anywhere in the stack, and then it starts with interop. Like there's multiple interop solutions. Like, do you think standardizing interop would solve a lot of this, like these UX problems with like interacting with multiple different L2s? Or how do you think interop fits into the standardization point that is being brought up here?
I think interop is not necessarily helpful for the end user experience. Obviously, the applications have to build for that user experience on top of whatever interop protocol you use. It does allow for developers to have access to a consistent API and consistent abstractions for how you do addressing between applications, how you do addressing between chains, how you define different security models, how do you select a security model, how do you switch between them. But it's still more like developer facing, I would say. I think it's fundamental, I think it needs to be solved, but it doesn't necessarily solve like the upstream problems of like user experience.
But do you think if developers are building around a common interop stack or solution, then perhaps the way in which users are able to interact with that solution is better because everyone's solving for the same problems instead of like solving for 10 different interop standards?
I guess I can use one specific example to talk about UX. Hypothetically, if every developer builds with IBC and every developer uses an IBC standard such as interchain counts, which I would say is similar in idea to the Vitalics like blog post about like key store rollups, not exactly the same thing, but essentially you can have the user have a single account, and from that single account they can control accounts on a bunch of different chains. If everyone adopts that and everyone uses the same thing, yes, that should technically improve user experience because they don't really have to like switch a bunch of wallet IDs. They always access the system through the same port of entry. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was hoping you would say. Because I think like no, in Cosmos, like yeah, ICs, ICQs, like if you can unlock that more broadly, like potentially really great UX unlocks. And then Matt, for like Caldera, like how do you think about standardization in your stack? Do you think there's a world where you want to see developers using Caldera to kind of standardize across different contexts, or like yeah, just more generally, how do you think about standardization and how we solve for UX?
Yeah, so I think for us, like, we view ourselves downstream of a lot of the activity here. Our life would be made a lot easier if more things were standardized, but like ultimately, we're a developer platform, we listen to like the needs of developers, and oftentimes those are really varied, right? When it comes to interop, you know, we'll tell folks, you know, go speak to Polymer, but you can also speak to Layer 0, Hyperlink, all these other folks. And I think like, you know, both the good and bad thing about Web3 is that, you know, there are all these tough problems and there are a lot of smart people working on them, and everyone is kind of trying to build a standard, which means there tends not to be a standard that people coalesce around. But yeah, for us, like, if we could, to your point, like if there was a core interop standard across, even just all the chains we ran, for example, would make it a lot easier for us to build more out-of-the-box solutions for things like token swaps, right, interoperability, maybe even integrate with wallets, at the kind of Caldera level rather than on like a chain-by-chain level. So we're very hopeful for it, but I would say we are not really the ones trying to drive that.
Do you see any other opportunities where standardization would be valuable beyond this interop?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically everywhere, like even with wallets, right, like even the process to add a new chain to a wallet needs to be standardized. The process that new chains get integrated with all sorts of infrastructure providers, it would be nice to have some standardization there. That doesn't need to happen at the protocol level. That could be from even like an industry norms sort of perspective. But basically anything that has to do with like connecting one thing to another thing in Web3 like tends to be a mess of competing standards.
If I may add, standardization is not that easy, right? I mean, yeah, we talk a lot about this and it's easier said than done. Simply because when you talk about interops, you have many types of rollups and they have different mechanisms in which they are secure, right? So for example, in the case of your optimistic rollup, ideally you will wait for this withdrawal period to be over, right? That is not needed if you're doing ZK. But then because ZK is very new, people have actually artificially introduced this withdrawal period. In the case of ZK saying, I think it's 24 hours or something. Now, Justin is pushing his base rollup thing, right? Which introduces new ways in which you could think about, right? So you have to wait for pre-confirmations, and then potentially through base rollup, you could also have atomic execution potentially. Now things change a lot because of all those new things coming up, which means that for standardization to happen, you have to somehow wait for the system to be mature enough so that you realize that okay, this is the way things will evolve over time, right? And I feel like it's very hard in this moment. It's not like ERC20 thing, right? Where you say, okay, people want to transfer, let's make it the standard way and then people will do it. It's very hard simply because new kinds of rollups, new kinds of infrastructure is being built on a daily basis and it's very hard. And some of them are also not built yet. That's not the problem. Base rollup is not there. Like, okay, maybe Tyco is there. But some of the newer designs that are coming up, they're not there. So you have to wait for those things to pop up before you can actually think of how to actually standardize those things across.
Yeah, I think like the inspiration for the standardization question was like when you're on Solana, for example, you're using that same wallet. You have the standards at the infra level. Like you're not using multiple bridges to interact with different applications. You have these standards, and I think from a UX standpoint, there's massive benefits to that. From a sovereignty, customizability standpoint, obviously there's downsides. And so there's like a middle ground where we can end up with like a pretty high degree of customizability without having all these like user experience perils that you have in modular stacks today. It's a great outcome, but you're right, like the politics of deciding on standards and the process to get there is so difficult. And so I don't think we're going to solve it today on the stage, but I think it's an interesting thing to discuss and like hopefully we can figure it out at some point. Cool, so I think, Simon, this is for you to start with. Where do you see intents fitting into this stack? Because obviously intents, like I think the forefront of like what they bring to the space is a UX solution. It's a better way, in my opinion, for users to interact with blockchains. Becomes what you want to do, less so how you want to do it. Yeah, I'm curious like where you see essential and obviously just intents more broadly fitting into solving this problem we're discussing.
Yeah, so I guess to answer the question, I would go back to what is the purpose of these blockchains that we use in the first place? It's fundamentally to come to a consensus over state. Like what we care about is state. Now, all current blockchains implement some sort of virtual machine like in service of that goal. So the idea is if we have a set of inputs, if we all agree on the virtual machine specification, we can all be relatively certain that we're going to agree on the outputs of that system. So like we have this virtual machine, it serves that purpose, but what the user cares about and the reason we're doing any of this in the first place is because of state. We want consensus over state. So what we're building and the way we're thinking about this is that like if everyone, so like, use the word intents, and that's a word that's been used a lot over the last like 24 months, and it has as many different meanings as people who've said it. Yeah, in our view, if the user can express outcomes in terms of state, but not only that, the applications can express their logic in terms of state purely, that's what we're aiming for. So like, you should have a system where you want to come to consensus over state, and you have a means of doing that, like declaratively, like the application is just there to say what sets of state are acceptable and unacceptable. It doesn't need to do this sort of lossy conversion of pushing it through a virtual machine in order to achieve that outcome. that's really the core premise of what we're building at least, is that you don't need the virtual machine representation of the logic of the application in order to achieve consensus over state.
To what extent do you think like kind of revising literally the way that people interact with blockchains, whether developers or users, eliminates some of the problems that we have in a non-declarative setting?
So the first thing is that in like a non-declarative or an imperative setting, you're subject to uncertainty around the state against which your transaction is going to be executed. So you're signing over a set of instructions, but you don't know like from what starting point those are going to be executed, and that's bad for users because, as we know through various MEP techniques, that is not a stable thing, and it can move against you, right at the last minute through things like sandwich attacks and things like that. So by allowing users to reason about state in a way that's much more direct, they're much more equipped to protect themselves against this sort of slippage, and I use that term in the broadest sense, by which I mean the transaction not being executed against the state that they expected. And instead they're able to reason about the outcome of what they want. I think this is a process we've seen in user experience outside of blockchain as well. Like it used to be the case if you had like euros and you wanted to send somebody like dollars, US dollars in America, like you would have to be aware of a lot more of the kind of life cycle of that transaction, to use like a crypto terminology, and that, okay, am I sending a wire transfer? Like, what are the delays? Like, is my bank aware of this? Like, how does this work? Whereas today, you look at Revolut, you say, I want this person to receive $50. Like, that's a declarative statement. We succeeded in those kinds of abstractions outside of crypto, and so yeah, that's kind of the experience that we're hoping for.
Awesome. Okay, we kind of talked about this before this panel, and I'm going to go ahead and ask this now. This is like really for anyone, I think, because I think what's interesting is in the intents paradigm, you have solvers, it could be AI agents eventually, really whoever it might be, they're actually the ones executing these transactions on behalf of the users. And now you just have users expressing what they want to do, less focus on how they want to do it, where today it's always like, I'm going to go on a movement, I'm going to go swap, move for, I don't know, whatever token. And you're going to go to this application, you're going to use this wallet, and you're going to do all of that. And like an intense focus world, perhaps you're not really, here's an I swap this token, do it for me. Do we think interop, the stack people are using, all of these things just become completely abstracted from users because we have solvers, agents, whatever, actually solving these things? Or are users going to always have a degree of like consciousness of which chains they're interacting with, which wallets they're using? And it's like not the same as like using, because like, if I use Netflix, I have no idea which cloud provider Netflix is using. Do you think blockchains always will have a degree of like, I know I'm using this chain, or will it actually, change actually happen? And you have no idea, and you don't really care. You just want to make sure your actions are fulfilled the way you want them to be. Simon, go ahead.
I guess my potentially like slightly controversial take on this is that to a degree users almost should care. Like we should search for standardization where it's justified, but we shouldn't push for it at the expense of the reality of the situation. And what I mean is that for the same reason that US dollars held in a bank account in America are, well, it depends who you are, but arguably are not worth the same as US dollars held in a bank account in Switzerland. Like the way in which you can access those dollars and the ways in which you can use them are not the same. And so there's an argument that there's an exchange rate that is not one-to-one between those commodities. And so my feeling is the same around blockchain state. It's all very well saying, I don't care, I don't know which chain I'm interacting with, but if the security guarantees of one chain are not the same as another, or you have a 2-week withdrawal period on this chain, and you can withdraw instantly with a ZK proof on this chain, your notion of valuation of the relative value of those assets shouldn't be one-to-one. It may be very slightly not one-to-one, but that spread is there at the moment.
I think the point of a blockchain is that the state is like transparent and you can see exactly what's going on. So a user should at least be able to see what the AI agent is going to do before you can refer to those and does the thing. And AI agents are still prone to making mistakes, so we have to be careful about that. I feel like yes, AI agents will be a part of this, but like you should be able to see exactly what's going on behind the scenes. And like for example, if you go on Solana and you try to swap a coin on Jupiter, it aggregates the best possible routes, right? Like we can do the same thing for AI agents. They can just show the path they're taking. That way the user can also confirm what's going on this right or not. Otherwise, we're also prone to like MITM attacks. Like that's if the AI agent is attacked by something and then it can to do something that the user did not intend to. So that's what I think about it.
I have a bit of maybe a controversial perspective on this. I think the notion that the user experience in crypto is highly fragmented is not true. So the analogy that you use, let's say we talk about Netflix. So if you use Netflix as an analogy, you have to go to Netflix first and select a movie. If you want to abstract away the watching a movie experience into like a user intent, you would essentially go out and have like Siri and say like, hey, look, Siri, I want to watch this movie, and Siri goes and sources the movie from the I guess a movie platform. And as a user, you're like, I don't even know if this is streaming from Netflix. I don't know if it's streaming from Hulu. I have no idea where it's streaming. That's a chain abstracted world. So like, we're actually not even there in the Web 2 sense. And I think Web 3 systems are infinitely more composable than these Web 2 systems. These Web 2 systems don't share databases. They don't like offer internal APIs for other companies to access. The foundational building blocks, I think, give way for us to develop this experience much quicker, and in a way that's fundamentally different from Web 2. But I don't think like the experience is that fragmented today.
My only counter is like on Roku, you could be like, I want to watch this movie, and I'll pull it up wherever. But you still go in the Netflix application, but you can search for it. And I think that's kind of like maybe where intents are. It's like, I want to do this, and it'll still bring you to the destination that'll actually execute that intent, and like you'll see the path that's being taken. But at least now it's not like you have to like go to 5 different dexes to find the pair that you actually want to swap for, and then maybe you have to go on multiple chains, now the bug's on me, to actually like do this. So like that's my counter. And I also think like personally, streaming is terrible for a user experience. Like, I think streaming is such a terrible outcome versus cable. Cable's monolithic, streaming's modular. That's literally is how I put it. There's cost savings for streaming, but anyways. Okay.
A modular streaming service, you'd be able to select which movies and shows from each streaming service that you want, and you can create your own subscription service.
Is that time? Like a horn? Okay. Okay, alright, all good. But I'm curious, like for Matt and Alan, like both of your points of views, like as you know, you guys both actually in movement as well as in this category, like as people who have like people building on their stack, like for different roll-ups, for different contexts, like how much do you want to push actually having these shared things across them? Because like, again, I keep on harping this point, but like the benefit of Monolithic today is that you don't have to worry about the underlying phrase. We're focusing on application, the smart contracts you're building. If you have people building on the Caldera stack, like Caldera stack or movement stack, like you have now a degree of like some control that you can express. And if you want to have a cohesive ecosystem that exists in the way that like a monolithic chain does, you could exert that potentially. Mind you, I have pushback if you want to develop, like, customize your stack. But, like, where do you think that like right amount of control and standardization exists? Like, should you force people to use your sequencer layer? Should you force people to use another component of your stack? Like, how much standardization is sharing the stack do you actually want to have?
Yeah, I think for us, like, just like with like any market, right? Like in some sense, like the company wants there to be standardization, as you mentioned, forcing or pushing people to a certain layer, whether that's something we developed or that's like a very close partnership. And then, the other side of the market is what projects want to use. You have this added wrinkle, of course, at least, for us, I guess for all of us, that like, what you're ultimately selling are like generic blockchains with a Turing-complete virtual machine. And so you can't really, like if someone says, I want to use layer 0, if we wanted to prevent them from doing that, I don't exactly know how. And I don't really think it'd be like great for anyone if we did. And for that reason, like, going back to like standardizations and, like what everyone else has been talking about, like, I think that like because there are all these different choices that can be made at the protocol layer, in some sense, like the cat's out of the bag, right? Like maybe there was a world where everyone coalesced around a strongly opinionated design, like the OP superchain, let's say. But like even if the OP superchain, is like the best interop solution imaginable, it's only going to like work for, let's say, like the 20% of chains that are in the superchain architecture, right? And same thing for ZK sync elastic chains. likely same thing for egg layer, whatever Arbitrum is cooking up. So you're going to need higher level components that abstract over all of these things. And I think, what everyone's talking about in banking is actually a really good example here, where you do have some core primitives, but really a lot of the abstractions that have happened in the banking world are just sort of banging your head against the wall and just covering all the edge cases. I think about Plaid and the companies in that category, and what do? They've just developed a bunch of rules for how to scrape bank balances and bank information out of every single bank's UI. And I think it seems in crypto, right, the underlying ethos is at the protocol level and at the infra level to offer as much choice as possible. Makes it very hard to coalesce around very strong standards. And so for that reason, I think a lot of the abstraction is going to need to come from higher level components within the UI, things at the UI layer, at the kind of API layer, at the wallet layer, rather than what we're doing or what even most of our partners are doing at the infra layer.
If I may add, so when Modularity was at its peak, pre-Celestia launch or at that time, people used to come to us and say, I want a decentralized RPC provider, then I want a decentralized sequencer, then I need an OP stack or a stack, then I need a DA layer. So they wanted to capture or touch every single element that was possible at different stacks, right? They realized that after a while that it's not going to work, at least in the current state. One, because many of the stacks are still being developed. OP stacks is moving quite a lot, right? So what you have today is not the same thing that you'll see tomorrow. Similar DA layers are moving quite a lot, right? There are a lot of changes being made. And then people realize that it's quite hard. If you put all these pieces together, you will end up actually building probably the worst blockchain ever, simply because of latency, right? Because you have to wait for this RPC provider to do something which is decentralized, it will take you some time. Then you wait for the shared sequencer to give you something, and then you wait for, if you really want to wait for, then you have to wait for the DA layer to post data, and that data has to be proven to the base layer, settlement layer, to say, okay, this data has indeed been posted on the DA layer. And so all of this adds to latency. So now, I would say I've seen personally some change in the mindset, where people are now a little bit more specific on what they actually need, rather than, hey, I want to shop everything on the shelf. But I would say standardization is still very hard, simply because you have OP stack, they are building their own little thing, Superchain, ad layer from Polygon. So it's and apparently ad layer will work with every other stack as well. But we have to see. We have to see how things play out. But it does feel like people are making sensible choices right now, not shopping for everything at least.
Yeah, so at Movement, we believe the Move language is really amazing and awesome. So we've taken the VM part of it, the virtual machine from Aptos and Sui, and we give both those options to developers to build upon. We also have this transpiler that converts Solidity code into Move code that can be run on the Movement L2. So our thesis is that we have tightly integrated parts of modular components that work well together that we've tested. So we have a decentralized sequencer, we have this VM that's really fast and uses a really nice developer-friendly language. So we take all these nicely integrated parts and we basically, instead of calling it a monolith, we call it an integrated blockchain because it's components that work really nicely together and we integrate. So, and then, after that we basically give developers the option to build wherever they want to, whether it's on the Aptos version of Move or Sui version of Move, along with even Solidity. So we handle the infrastructure level things for the developers and the users so that they can focus on the application layer and put things on top. That's our thesis.
One thing I wanted to add on the specificness side of things, I guess, is that if you're going to encourage users to interact in this declarative way where they're expressing what they want, then you need to give them the tools to do that in a way that's exhaustively specific. So to take the Netflix example to the point of, I guess, esoteric nausea, the experience that the user wants is to have watched the movie. Now, yes, that's a multivariate thing. It's not just, can you get me the movie, yes or no, it's what resolution is it in? Does it have subtitles? Can I rent it just for now, or can I watch it in a week? It's a multivariate problem. And so you need the tools for the user to be able to express those things. So yeah, I guess we're at the point where I'm allowed to share what we're building a little bit. Part of what we're building is a domain-specific language for these declarative statements. So users can, in a way that's fully general, express multivariate problems around state preferences in a way that's exhaustive. And I think that's an important component of this.
100%. Okay, I have to ask this last question. Everyone's gonna roll their eyes because it's like the topic of the week, basically. But how much does like the based roll-up conversation and pre-confirmations, all of these things that come along with the based roll-up, narrative, how much does this solve what we're talking about? Because I think from where I sit, like an argument could be made that based roll-ups make roll-ups more monolithic than they are today. Like they feel like they're part of like the main chain more than like a L2 is today. Is that a misnomer? Am I off there? Does anyone here feel strongly about this? If we don't want to answer this question, we don't have to, because there'll be 50,000 other panels this week to talk about it. But I'm curious if anyone thinks strongly about how this all will play out in this.
Well, I think, in my opinion, base rollup is no different from eigenlayers, ABS, in my opinion. It's kind of the same thing, right? Literally, what you're doing is you're asking your L1 validators to do something else, right? And that something else is not in protocol. It's outside of protocol, right? It's not baked in Ethereum's protocol, right? They are allowed not to do it if they don't want to. So it's a very optional feature, optional request, optional operation. So for me, it's not necessarily modular or monolithic. It's more of like L1 validators are supposed to do something else other than what they're doing today. So what I'm saying is that it's not apples to orange kind of apples to apples comparison. It's like a different thing in my opinion. It's more of a L1 validators doing something else outside of what they're supposed to do at the Ethereum level.
But do you think pre-confirmations could offer, a benefit that doesn't exist today? Whereas like, ideally you can have just faster interactions across rollups or from L2 to L1 and so forth.
So in my opinion, pre-confirmation is a must for base rollup. You simply cannot have base rollup without pre-confirm because otherwise you're basically hitting Ethereum L1 thing. So it's like it gives you, first it's needed because you can't live without it, and two, once you have pre-confirmation, you could build different things. For example, composability as well. So you could say, hey, instead of just including or giving me guaranteed that my transaction will be included, also guarantee that these transactions will execute if you were to execute them at some point in the future, right? So it gives you atomic execution on top of atomic inclusion. So I would say yes, it gives you composability. You could potentially build the likes of Hop protocol or any of the liquidity style bridges on top as well. So it will hopefully improve experience, but then nothing is there yet. I think we still have to build a lot of things and we see how those models will work.
Yeah, I think the long term of like, let's say for cross-chain intent, it's like now solve for a competitive price, one the time, and also the cost to actually execute a transaction across blocks based on Arbitrum. Then maybe for like Polymer as well, it's like you can give basically instant finality with pre-confirmations because now you're not waiting on the consensus of the two chains that are being connected and they both have pre-confirmation. So it's like an interesting thing. It's a massive puzzle to actually unlock. But I have no idea where we're at in terms of time. I assume we're pretty much done here. I think my main takeaway from this is like, we do want standards. They're very hard to enforce, especially in a modular setting where the entire point of modularity is giving developers the customizability they want to unlock whatever they want to optimize for. Monolithic obviously has standards, you're more constrained than what you can do in terms of the developer experience, but there's benefits for the UX. Seems like we'll end up probably somewhere in the middle, where we'll have some standards, some things not standardized, and maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. We don't need to have everything feel like it's the same. You want to have like some customizable, some differences in user experience. So that's my takeaway. Does anyone object to any of that? Or can I walk away feeling a bit more enlightened today?
No, I think a bit of chaos is good. I think this is what crypto is about, so I think it's good to have some chaos. It helps people to come with creative ideas, and if you standardize too early, you might miss up with other things that may come up and get built up in the future.
I'll add to the base roll conversation. I think long term, the fastest rollups on Ethereum are probably not going to be base rollups. They're probably going to be using OpDA layers. They're probably going to be using finality layers, and we're going to potentially even see like rollups producing. Like maybe if everybody's aiming to produce blocks in the order of milliseconds, so we may see L2s interacting with each other at millisecond latency with different set of trust assumptions, obviously because the underlying infrastructure is a little bit different. There are inherent trade-offs that you're making when you have a massive validator set versus a tiny one. There's inherent trade-offs that you make with every single DA implementation as well. So I think there's it's good to have these different choices and allow people to make these trade-offs to get the performance characteristics that they want.
Any final words from anyone else? Or is it a wrap?
Okay.
All right. Thank you everyone for coming to watch, and thank you to all my panelists. Great chatting.